Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a pretty intense investigation into a stack of source material that's focused squarely on some really high-stakes political controversy.
Mm.
This source, and we should say it's highly critical of Donald Trump and his administration, it claims to capture a period where the White House was facing, well, not just one crisis, but multiple simultaneous high-pressure crises.
Right.
The central idea in the source is that the administration was in full panic mode, just grappling with everything from international conflicts that weren't quite what they seemed
Yeah.
to major domestic healthcare threats and some deeply concerning personal allegations.
And our mission here is, well, it's razor sharp.
Yeah.
Because the source material is so explicitly partisan, so critical, we have to approach it with, total impartiality.
Right.
Our task is really just to strip away the inherent bias, the commentary. We're
Yeah.
strictly here to report on the specific and often explosive claims being made.
And the evidence they present.
Exactly. The alleged evidence presented, and any counterclaims or denials that are cited within the source itself. We're just conveying the information so you, the learner, can grasp the core issues without us endorsing the source's viewpoint.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The source argues this whole panic mode thing was triggered by intense pressure around some deeply personal issues. So I guess we have to start with the controversy around the alleged selective release of photos and inventory related to Jeffrey Epstein.
That's right. This event, according to our source, put the White House on immediate defense. The report claims that Donald Trump and his team were actively releasing statements communicating internally.
And what were they saying?
They're blaming Democrats, blaming them for allegedly leaking, or their phrase was selectively releasing photos and documents from the Epstein estate with the explicit goal of trying to make Donald Trump look bad.
So the administration's response, as reported anyway, was immediate blame and denial. But the source then uses that response to build a bigger political argument, doesn't it?
It does, exactly. The source points out what it sees as an irony in that defensive posture.
Mm-hmm.
The counter-argument made within this report is basically, if the former president was truly innocent, the logical response would have been to release all the documents himself.
To be transparent.
To be transparent, yeah. Rather than immediately accusing political opponents of trying to create that transparency,
Yeah.
it frames that initial reaction as, proof of panic.
And the specific items that the source cited, the ones allegedly among these released photos or found at the estate, they're incredibly specific and deeply disturbing. It really underscores the severity of what the White House was facing.
Oh, they certainly are. The source focused on a handful of very specific, very unusual items it claimed were revealed. This included the now infamous Trump pumpkin photo.
Right.
And an image detailing a pretty complex massage therapy system. The report also focused on a highly specialized glove, which the source described as being used for something disgusting.
Okay, and this is where the source material claims the information directly implicated the former president. What were the specific photo claims, the ones about his direct involvement?
So the report really zeroed in on claims about photos from Epstein's personal photo book. The source alleges these images featured Trump with young girls.
And were their faces visible?
No, the faces of these individuals were reportedly redacted in the images being discussed, and the source was careful to describe them as potentially survivors of Epstein.
Okay.
And beyond that, the alleged inventory included some deeply unsettling items labeled with Trump's name, specifically Trump condoms, as well as other disturbing things like extreme restraints and pussy pumps.
Wow.
And finally, the source detailed two other images, a cartoon which appears to be an underage girl gagged, and a photograph that was reportedly on Epstein's desk showing what looked like a victim either passed out and suffering.
Those are extremely graphic claims. And the source clearly believes their release caused genuine political distress. But the White House wasn't just reacting defensively. The source argues that at the same time, they were mobilizing a counter-effort focused on aggressive fundraising.
That's the core connection the source makes. Personal crisis management immediately triggers financial and political mobilization. The report details this aggressive, time-sensitive fundraising happening at the same time as the leak controversy. And the method was just as interesting. Trump was reportedly sending these personalized emails to supporters.
The ones that look like a text message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Designed to look like an urgent personal text.
Yeah.
The opening line was often something like, "Hey, is this the right contact information for you? I'm in between meetings right now."
So really trying to create that sense of urgency.
Absolutely. The goal was to get a quick $10 donation before a 24-hour deadline hit. And the source makes a point of noting that this was all happening even though Trump was not, at that time, officially running for office.
Yeah.
The takeaway for the source was clear. Allegations of personal conduct were immediately repurposed to fuel the political machine.
And just before we move on, the source did include some commentary on his physical state during this period of alleged panic.
They did, yeah. Though it was brief. The source mentioned claims of his declining health, and they pointed to specific photos of him allegedly passing out, an image of a discolored and bandaged hand, and then just general speculation about cognitive decline.
So they were building a whole picture of instability.
That's right. All of it used to build this picture of instability during a crisis on multiple fronts.
So if the domestic situation was defined by denial and panic, the source suggests the international claims, which we'll turn to now, were characterized by outright fabrication, almost like a secondary crisis management technique to project strength abroad.
And this is where the narrative really pivots sharply. It moves from alleged cover-ups to alleged exaggerations. The source focuses heavily on the critique that the administration was fabricating, or at least way overstating, its role in brokering global peace and ceasefires.
Okay, so what's the clearest example they gave?
The most concrete example, the one with the clearest factual contradiction, was the claim about Thailand and Cambodia.
Walk us through that specific claim.
So the source reported that on December 12th, Trump made this definitive public announcement. He claimed he'd spoken with the prime ministers of Thailand and Cambodia and that they agreed to cease all shooting effective this evening.
Okay, a big claim.
A huge claim. He even went so far as to reference an original peace accord that was made with me. So it was presented as this major diplomatic success.
So what was the factual counterclaim that the critical media outlet cited?
It was immediate, and it was absolute. The source argues first that Trump had basically nothing to do with the original peace accord they were talking about, which they asserted was primarily brokered by Malaysia and China. But what's far more damning, as reported by this outlet, is what happened on the ground. Thailand immediately denied Trump's claim, and the border clashes continued, resulting in what the source described as mass casualties, including more than 24 people in Thailand.
That is just an astonishing disconnect. You have a major announcement of peace contradicted by mass casualties on the very same day.
Yes, and the source argues that this intervention might have actually worsened the conflict because the leader making the announcement had, in their words, no clue of what actually is happening in that region.
Was this claim of fabricated ceasefires a recurring theme in the source material?
It was presented as a pattern, yes. They cited a previous similar instance where Trump had allegedly lied about brokering an historic peace deal or ceasefire in Gaza, dismissing those earlier claims as, quote, all BS.
And what was their evidence that this Gaza ceasefire was non-existent?
They pointed to recent military action, an Israeli Air Force attack that struck a car in Gaza, specifically targeting the deputy head of Hamas's military wing, Rahad Saah.
And just to provide some context for you, the listener, targeting a high-value military leader like Rahad Saah would demonstrate, according to the source's argument, that any ceasefire Trump claimed to have brokered was either being totally ignored or, well, it never existed in the first place.
Precisely. And the source noted, significantly, that the U.S. was allegedly not consulted before this specific attack happened, which further undermines the idea that the U.S. was some key active mediator.
Okay, so let's move to Syria. The source reported a horrific ambush involving U.S. troops. How did that incident fit into this overall critique of foreign policy?
So the report focused on a very serious incident that was confirmed by a senior U.S. official to Fox News, which is an unusual source for this outlet to cite. U.S. troops and Syrian troops were attacked by an ISIS-affiliated group, and it resulted in multiple injuries. The source then makes this very deliberate contextual link, connecting this serious event to a bizarre historical anecdote.
What was the narrative frame they were trying to build there? What's the connection?
They were trying to contrast the serious, dangerous reality for U.S. troops with the president's alleged past behavior. They cited this bizarre clip of Trump hosting a Syrian-related leader, whom the source identified as the former leader of al-Qaeda in the White House.
And what happened?
And allegedly spraying perfume on him and sniffing him. The source was essentially contrasting a moment of serious injury with what they saw as past irresponsible diplomatic theater.
And finally, the source just briefly touched on the war in Ukraine just to give a sense of the general global instability during this alleged panic mode.
They did. They mentioned the continuing war, citing a major Russian ballistic and drone attack on the Odessa Oblast in southern Ukraine. That attack reportedly damaged 2 ports and at least 3 commercial vessels, specifically targeting civilian and commercial infrastructure. It was a reminder that this massive conflict was raging on alongside everything else.
Okay, let's pull the focus back home now. Let's pivot to what the source frames as maybe the most critical, immediate policy threat faced by millions of Americans. A threat that was, according to the source, being ignored or actively dismissed by the administration.
Yeah, the impending expiration of the Affordable Care Act subsidies.
Exactly.
So if the personal claims were a distraction and the international claims were a fabrication, the source frames the expiring ACA subsidies as the real, imminent threat to the public.
Uh-huh.
They presented this not as a political debate, but as a ticking time bomb, causing real widespread public anxiety. And the crucial detail is the scale. The subsidies are set to expire, which the source claims could result in 24 million Americans seeing their healthcare premiums just skyrocket.
And what's the practical effect of that for those 24 million people? What does that actually mean?
The report claimed it would translate into higher cost, worse coverage, which was leaving people terrified. The source argues this is an intentional political maneuver.
How so?
They claim that a political faction could easily extend these subsidies, but is refusing to, leveraging the threat of rising healthcare costs as a political tool. The financial hit for families is immediate and just enormous.
Given that this crisis affects tens of millions of people, what was the former president's alleged response when he was questioned directly about this?
According to the report, when he was questioned about the looming expiration and the panic it was causing, his response was highly dismissive.
What did he say?
He allegedly told observers, "Stop being so dramatic." He followed that by just asserting that Republicans would put great legislation on his desk, but with no immediate plan, no mechanism to prevent these catastrophic premium increases.
And there was more to it, right?
Yes, the source added that in a move they saw as mocking, he put on a cowboy hat shortly after this interaction during what they called a bizarre press conference. It suggested to them a complete lack of seriousness.
That stark contrast, a crisis for 24 million people and an alleged dismissive response, brings us to the final critical insight from the source: how these events are covered or intentionally ignored by the media.
And this is where the source really shifts from just reporting events to analyzing the information flow itself. It was fascinating. The source observed this massive difference in media coverage.
For the healthcare story.
For the healthcare story, yeah. This issue of severe financial consequence for a huge part of the population was covered predominantly by center and left media outlets.
And the absence of coverage was the key point.
Absolutely. The source claimed that almost no media on the right was reporting on this massive domestic policy threat. They argued that this creates a critical information blind spot for people who primarily get their news from conservative media, leaving them totally uninformed about a threat to their own household finances.
So the source seemed to suggest that media analysis tools are now almost a necessary defense mechanism for the average person to get the full picture.
That's the suggested solution. The source, while discussing a service called Ground News, framed it as a tool that pulls thousands of articles, organizes them by story, and explicitly shows you what the right, center, and left are all reporting. The key idea is just getting a broader perspective.
To overcome those blind spots.
Overcome those blind spots, yeah. It suggests that your chosen media diet really fundamentally shapes your reality, even on something as concrete as healthcare subsidies.
And did the source offer any conclusions about the general reliability of media based on these tools?
They did summarize a few findings. They observed that generally independent media tends to have a higher factuality rating, while large media conglomerates on either side of the aisle often have mixed or low factuality.
Interesting.
It suggests that the ownership structure and the drive for profit or scale can influence perceived accuracy. And they highlighted the critical value of a blind spot feed, a function that specifically flags stories, like the ACA crisis, that are being disproportionately covered by just one side.
So, what does this all mean for you, the learner? We've moved through these allegations of deeply concerning personal conduct to international claims where official announcements of peace were contradicted by mass casualties, and finally to a major domestic crisis that was allegedly ignored by a huge part of the media.
This deep dive really highlights the enormous challenge you face as a learner, as an informed citizen, in processing this kind of high-stakes political information today. The source's claims really underscore how difficult it is to verify facts when global leaders and media organizations present such starkly opposing versions of reality. It's especially hard with time-sensitive topics like healthcare subsidies or claims of international ceasefires.
So the source suggests the only way to navigate it is to actively seek out what you're not being shown.
Exactly, to seek out the perspectives that challenge your own immediate access to information.
So here's a final thought to chew on until our next deep dive. Considering the immediate denials from countries like Thailand and Cambodia after a supposed ceasefire was announced, a fabrication that allegedly allowed mass casualties to continue, what responsibility do we have as informed citizens to immediately cross-reference major political announcements against primary sources? And critically, how does that information lag or our own political allegiance affect our ability to perceive world events accurately, especially when one side of the media is intentionally not covering a policy crisis that affects millions,